I made a video a little over 2 years ago about my experience with primarily SIBO. It became the top all-time video in the 10-year-old SIBO community on Reddit, which has 33,000 members, and it has 200,000 views on YouTube. So the only reason to say that is because I had no background. I'm not a streamer. I don't have any kind of social media presence whatsoever. The only reason any of that happened is because it made sense to a lot of people in the community. Some people, it made a big difference trying out the things I was talking about. It was also just, helping people to be understood, because someone who actually knows what the experience is like can reach out to them, and so it really just helped the community as a whole. So there's been a lot of demand since then for some kind of update. It's been a little over 2 years ago. It was July 30th, 2022. Today is October 25th, 2024. And so I frequently get asked, what the heck's going on? It's been a couple of years. Would you let us know what it's like since your experiences, since you've been over SIBO? Okay, so this is going to be an update about a lot of things. It's going to be an update about my thoughts and experiences since then. I'm going to have some kind of edit thoughts to my first video, and then just a lot to talk about in general. So it's going to be long. I have some notes here I'm going to follow, much like the first time. But as I said, I'm not a pro streamer, so this is not going to be edited in some super digestible way. It's just going to be a long old lecture. Let's go. But major topics to kind of tell you right up front. Major reasons what's going to be in here to see if this is of interest to you to watch. First of all, a big takeaway in my first video, ultimately for a lot of people, is this idea that artichoke can help stimulate the migrating motor complex, and it significantly helps symptoms. So in that first video, I really I arrived at that kind of through trial and error and hearing kind of rumors. But in this video, I'm actually going to talk about potential reasons why. What are the mechanisms that might potentially explain why this helps people? So there's actually potential answers to that, so we can go over that. Second of all, what's one of the most common things people bring up is, how do I get certain extracts or, some brand or whatever? And one thing that's always bothered me, I haven't ever wanted this to be tied to a certain brand or whatever. I tried the first thing I got my hands on and it worked, but, it's not really about some brand. And more specifically, I found a way that you can just make it yourself for pennies. So I'm going to tell you how you can take care of this yourself anywhere in the world, because so much of this has to do with people all over the world can't find a certain brand from some country. No, I'm going to tell you how to take care of this yourself. Third big thing that's going to happen, I'm going to tell you what happened in terms of my origin story. I've actually figured out exactly why this happened to me. I didn't know back then, and I finally know the answer of what exactly happened to me and why this all got started. And it's actually going to be pretty interesting because it's not quite as textbook simple. It's a good example of how this could sneak up on people without them realizing it happened to them. So good lesson there. Fourth, we're going to talk a lot about IBS versus SIBO. That's going to be a big topic in this. The first time IBS was it was really discussed as kind of a scapegoat mechanism that doctors used, for SIBO people, but there's actually a lot more to talk about on that topic. So this is going to be interesting. The fifth major thing you're going to get from this is I've got a significant suggestion that I have not come up with. It's actually you guys. The community has provided me a huge amount of help, and sharing this to everyone is a big deal. So many people recommended to me over the years that I look at this, and it is an amazing tool, as good or better than anything I've ever brought up before. So I'm going to talk about that. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of good stuff in here. Okay, so let's get started. All right. So my first section I got here is some edits I'd like to throw into the original video, or just comments on the original video for those who have watched it. So first of all, I talk about myself as a hydrogen case. I'll talk about my, because in SIBO, the whole methane hydrogen thing. By the way, if you're just new to this whole topic and you're just watching this video, you might get lost because I'm not going to just do like a giant recap of everything. There's a lot of information around SIBO and all this kind of stuff, and this video will be 10 hours long if I recap everything from the last one. So it might move a little fast if you're not familiar with some of the fundamentals of SIBO, because I'm not going to explain every little bit of it. Okay, so forgive me for that, but it's just kind of necessary at this point. Okay, so in the first video I described myself as a hydrogen case, and that was because I was told I was a hydrogen case, not just by a GI but also the test manufacturer. So I've thrown a link into my first video. I'll probably put it under this one too, just for people's reference. I was not just a hydrogen case, I was a methane and hydrogen case. And this is really a demonstration of what a disaster information is in this world, like in this SIBO universe, right? How poor information is, because even test manufacturers can't even figure out what you have. And so specifically what I mean is to be positive by the American consensus for methane, which they like now kind of branding as intestinal methane overgrowth, or IMO. What they consider positive is any measurement in your small or large intestine, through the breath test that's over 10 ppm. And hydrogen is incredibly different, because that has to do with, they're cutting the time off basically at 90 minutes and saying, we only care about the small intestine part, not the large intestine part, because we expect hydrogen to go up in the large intestine part. And it shouldn't, or I'm sorry, it should, because there's normal expected bacteria there. The small intestine part, we're capping it off to 90 minutes, and you're going to have this kind of, you have a baseline amount of hydrogen, and there has to be this kind of hydrogen rise in less than 90 minutes. They need some increment increase, to consider you positive. Well, the test menu, so you can tell those two different things. Methane is just a flat number. It's just, hey, if you ever, for the entire 180 minutes or however long your test is, if you ever go over 10 parts per million, you're positive. Whereas hydrogen's got this much more complex, thing to be positive. Well, it turns out this test manufacturer didn't know what they were doing, and they labeled me negative for methane because they were trying to apply the same logic that hydrogen uses for methane. So you can see they labeled me negative for methane, even though I had I think it was 12 ppm in my upper and 17 ppm in my lower for methane. So, they were comparing it to some baseline of 8 and thinking it's fine. So anyway, it's just a good example there of how, you really have to figure everything out for yourself, because even the people making the test don't know what they're doing. But more importantly, it's to say that my story applies to a wider audience than I first imagined, because I thought, hey, I am just a hydrogen case, and people say methane's even worse, and so I don't know if methane people, if it's necessarily going to be as helpful for them, blah, 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 blah. Turns out it doesn't matter. I had all of the above. Right, so I had everything at once. So, encouraging for methane folks. So don't feel like you're, out in the cold. You're part of this too. All right. Another comment I'd like to throw in. I didn't quite understand in the first video, or I might have said something that to me in retrospect didn't sound quite right about the gastritis aspect. I want to clear something up about that. The gastritis that I had been developing in early stages is not necessarily caused by, is really not caused by SIBO. I think I had this impression in my head that there was this kind of swelling and pressure in my small intestine, and it was kind of preventing my stomach from emptying, right? And so the stomach acid was developing duodenitis, my stomach and duodenum were developing issues, right? That were seen in the endoscopy. So it's not actually that SIBO is pressing on the stomach or preventing it from draining or something like that. The actual issue is that it's all the same root cause, which is that you have migrating motor complex impairment, right? Because the thing is that the MMCs, the migrating motor complex, the MMCs originate in the stomach. They don't start in the small intestine, right? So they start in the stomach. So your stomach empties, right? And then the small intestine does its peristaltic movement to continue that draining, right? So the point being, we've already discussed a lot about MMC impairment and all that. Well, that MMC impairment applies also to your stomach. So if your stomach is not draining often, well, you have an accumulation of stomach acid, and it starts to erode your lining, and there you go, right? So that's why so many people with SIBO have gastritis issues. And in fact, one of the top things that people ask me about is, how can I tolerate things like ginger or something like that in an attempt to stimulate my MMCs when I have gastritis, which is a very hard question, right? Because everybody's individual, and you really gastritis is a hard problem in and of itself. Very painful, very limiting. So anyway, there's a reason why there's so much overlap. A lot of SIBO people with gastritis. And it's because it's all coming from the same problem. You have MMC impairment. The other thing I want to point out and really clarify, I don't know if I don't think I ever stated anything to this point, but it's something that I really need to emphasize because it gets confused a lot. MMCs do not govern the large intestine, right? So the large intestine, so people having bowel movements and all that in your colon, it's migrating motor complex is not that, right? So if you have migrating motor complex is not going all the way through your large intestine and making you have a bowel movement, right? All MMCs are doing is emptying your stomach, propelling your food through your small intestine, and then depositing in the large intestine. And the large intestine has its own mechanisms for how it decides to go to the bathroom, right? So just to be clear on that, because a lot of people are trying to equate MMCs to BMs, and it's not a one-to-one. Okay. There's one comment. It comes up a lot, and I don't have a perfect answer for it because there isn't a perfect answer, but I do want to throw this out there because it's a substantial piece of information. A lot of people ask about this whole thing. We're talking about trying to promote upper motility and all this stuff. They ask about, they clearly know that they have like diarrhea problems, right? Which I never had. I never had that kind of issue. But they'll, say that this is somebody who they eat anything and they just immediately can tell their body goes into a sort of shock and everything empties all the way, right? And they're like, well, how the heck, do I need to promote motility? And I would agree that doesn't sound right at all. But more broadly to me, the thing that's always confused me about that is it doesn't sound like you have SIBO, because that's kind of the antithesis of SIBO. And so the thing is, and I'm not trying to gaslight anybody, honestly, but I do want to throw this one piece of information out there. One of the biggest criticisms that the SIBO world is kind of burdened with by, some critical doctors and whatever at this point is that there is a systemic weakness to the idea of a breath test. And the weakness of it is that some people have what they want to call IBS-D, right? So the description that I brought up essentially, right? Your body's reacting significantly to the fact that you've ate something or whatever it is, and it's evacuating everything, right? Well, here's the problem. That is structurally going to violate the whole concept of a breath test, right? Because the breath test is going to say, drink this stuff, this kind of sugar water stuff, right? Which can stimulate those IBS-D people. So everything shoots right through them. And essentially, they get that sugar stuff into their large intestine very quickly, much less than this expected motility window of 90 minutes, right? I don't know what that number could be, but let's just throw a number out there and say, this sugar water just flew through these guys in 40 minutes. And now it's in the large intestine. The large intestine bacteria that are supposed to be there are, they obviously start eating all the sugar water, producing this, these hydrogen in your breath or whatever starts showing up. And according to the test, that means that you're positive for SIBO, because it says, well, the only way that you could be measuring that high, from where you started to here in 40 minutes is because you have all this bacteria in your small intestine. Well, not if everything just shot right through you and it's actually your large intestine that you're measuring just way earlier than a normal person. So, that's a problem with the way the test happens. So if you're somebody who you react violently to food like that, and you've taken a SIBO test and it's like, yeah, you're positive. I don't want to gaslight you and be like, you don't have SIBO. I don't know, but I would say to really think about the possibility of that, because it's something that is a weakness to that concept of that test, and it's kind of the big point that they like to criticize about it, because there's not really a good answer for it. Right now, the trouble is the diagnostic testing the test that they do have does help a lot of people who need some kind of testing, right? And I could go spend a whole bunch of time about why breath tests are important, even though they have this weakness. But I do think it should be more known to people, especially when they're asking, like, well, these kinds of questions, like, well, how does any of this make sense if I'm obviously a diarrhea person and I'm like, this kind of thing is happening? It's like, well, you might be in that bucket who's accidentally gotten scooped up into this. So I think, we should be all aware of that. So that's my thoughts for all the tons of people ask me, well, what about my MMCs when I have that? Well, I don't know, but I would say consider that possibility, right? You possibly are an IBS-D person and you don't even have SIBO. You might have extremely active MMCs, right? Okay. Next piece that I want to delve into, that's not necessarily an edit to the original, but it's an add-on that's very significant. This is the last big piece before I get into all my experiences in the last 2 years. Okay, so in the past video, talked about all kinds of stuff, but ultimately, so much of what it's about, is this migrating motor complex impairment problem, right? And ultimately, I suggested experimenting with some simple, low-hanging fruit options for stuff that has the possibility of helping promote the migrating motor complex. And in particular, for me, what helped was a extract of artichoke and ginger. I kind of stumbled upon this through the grapevine, hearing rumors and just kind of following some old evidence, but I didn't really have any working theory of why it actually functionally works. It was just that I'd heard that it does sometimes. Okay, so I'd like to expand on that because I've done a lot of reading since then and a lot of digging and pieced some stuff together, and this is all a working theory, but there's quite a lot of evidence out there actually, because these little bits and pieces have been explored before actually and studied. I just don't know if anyone's really put the puzzle together here. So here's the deal. There is one chemical before I get into that, let's talk about this. There are things called bitter taste receptors. TAS2R. I'm going to call them TAS2Rs. Okay? Bitter taste receptors. And they do not only exist in your mouth, they actually exist through your gut. So your intestines are able to taste bitter food. Why in the world do we have that? Well, we probably evolved them to detect if we were poisoned. If we'd eaten some kind of poisonous fruit or whatever the heck it was, apparently bitterness in general was a good signal that, okay, whatever the heck that is, we probably need to get that out. And so if something is overwhelmingly bitter, we would eject it. So the point is, when these TAS2R bitter taste receptors in your intestines get stimulated, they actually cause hormones to release, which stimulate the vagus nerve. And anybody who's involved in this whole situation, they realize, everybody knows by now, vagus nerve, huge deal. It's the whole gut-brain connection thing, literally mechanically. It's this giant nerve that runs up your spine, from your gut to your brain, and it's governing all this kind of action, right? So hugely involved in motility and all kinds of stuff, right? So point being, if you can, if these bitter taste receptors are stimulated, it can start a whole chain reaction of your body going, okay, let's get this stuff moving. Okay, so there is one particular chemical that is found in the leaves of artichokes. It is called cynaropicrin. And cynaropicrin, I've looked a bunch at what's in ginger, what's in artichoke, and all this stuff, and there's other good stuff too. You could say that a bunch of this stuff is like, it's anti-inflammatory, it's all positive, but cynaropicrin, if you read about this thing, to me, it just seems overwhelmingly to be what's responsible. And in fact, if you look at some of the patents and stuff behind these extracting processes and stuff and what they're standardizing to try to get out of artichoke, they're trying to standardize it and maximize the dose of cynaropicrin that they're extracting. So it is an incredible chemical. I mean, if you just look at the Wikipedia page, I'm sure I'll probably link the Wikipedia page for it so everyone can just look at it. It is amazing. I mean, it's one of those like miracle chemicals. It is simultaneously, it binds to TAS2Rs. They have studied it and found that it does. They also know that it's antibacterial. It kills E. coli. It's antifungal. It's antispasmodic. It's an analgesic. It's an antioxidant. And it even kills cancer. So it's crazy. They're trying to figure out how to make cancer drugs out of it. And so it's unbelievable chemical, right? But it's in these leaves of these artichoke, which we don't really eat the leaves so much. I know people, first of all, people hardly eat artichokes, but even if they do, you're not really getting, it's one of those, like, they call them like phytochemicals. It's one of these like chemicals that's in the green part of the leaf that we're not really eating those, right? But if you're, powderizing and extracting, the vegetable, this is what one of the things they're trying to target to get out of it. So it's an amazing chemical. And so here's the deal. Of all the things that it says there, to me, I think what's probably the two most important pieces of things that it does are obviously the TAS2R binding, because there you go. You're stimulating these bitter food sensors, right? And you're not doing it in a way to really like overwhelm your system and be like, oh my god, we're poisoned, eject. But I think that's one of those sweet spots where like you can just stimulate it enough to get those hormones released to get your body flowing, right? That's the goal, right? So so that's primarily what's driving everything, I think. And second of all, the antispasmodic thing is a huge deal, because something that why is my dog freaking out? I bet you my wife is watering. She always wants to get the garden hose when she sees it. Something that I have come to expect with this whole MMC thing, or that's like my mindset has shifted, is that I used to think that, we have this horrible MMC impairment, everything's backed up, all up through our small intestine, everything's slowed down, all this. I had this envisioning of like it was dormant and it was stagnant and it needed to be stimulated. And what I envision now, I think, is actually the opposite. I actually think the reason why people with this situation have impaired MMCs is not that it's never firing, right? Because imagine some kind of thing doing a peristaltic wave, right? You have this combination of relaxation and then the wave of firing, right? That like flows down it, right? I used to think we were just stagnant and we couldn't get the firing. I don't think that's it. I think what's happening is we're actually continuously spasming. I think we're firing all the time. And so that's why we actually need to relax the intestines so that they can then fire in that wave form. And so the antispasmodic feature that it has is huge, because then you're relaxing the intestines and then allowing them to do that. Okay, so your combination of relaxing and stimulating TAS2Rs to release hormones to communicate to the vagus nerve, okay, it's time to start doing the motion, right? Boom. I mean, amazing combination of things. Okay, so here's the deal. Cynaropicrin is water soluble given enough heat. So you can capture cynaropicrin from artichoke leaves in a tea with hot water. I mean, so here's what I would suggest. If you're somebody who you're like, I have trouble finding a extract, and to be honest, these extracts have frustrated me over the years because people get any which one they can find. One of the biggest things that is an issue for me is, like, I've noticed there's one thing where people found a common, easy one to get a hold of. Well, they put apple cider vinegar in it for God knows what reason. And probably because it's just a thing people think is good. But, as I've already mentioned, a lot of these people have a systemic reason that they're developing gastritis. So you start feeding these people vinegar, and they start asking, well, why am I in pain? Vinegar is one of the worst things you can possibly eat if you're a gastritis-prone person. So there's a lot of reasons. If you can't either find an extract or, whatever, and you want to just do it yourself, here's the deal. Literally, get an artichoke. Just get an organic artichoke, right? So it's not covered in chemicals and stuff. Just get something good, because you're going to make tea out of it, okay? Get an organic artichoke, wash it. Take 2 leaves off of it. What you want is to get that cynaropicrin out of those 2 leaves, okay? So and it's trapped, basically the outer wall of that leaf is a thick, waxy substance, right? It's what keeps the phytochemicals in for the plant. We want those phytochemicals in our tea. So get a knife and just score it a bunch of times so it's exposed, right? The green fleshy part's exposed. Put those in a teacup, boil tea in a kettle. Put that hot water, once it's ready, it needs to be hot. Don't put lukewarm in, it won't work. It needs to be hot. Put the boiling kettle water on the 2 tea leaves, let it rest for 10 minutes. You're good. There's enough cynaropicrin in there for it to matter. And honestly, it tastes pretty nice. I've done it a ton of times. All right. Part of why I've taken a long time to get to this video is I've been doing a lot over the last 2 years. So I've done, I want to know, I wanted to be prepared to talk about this. So yes, I've tested this a lot of times. And to me, that I think was the most effective way, easy way that people can get access to this thing. So try that out. And heck, if you want to try a stronger dose, you can use more tea leaves. I thought 2, or use more artichoke leaves. I thought 2 was a pretty good dose though. And if you get a real strong dose, I mean, you could go crazy. You use 10 leaves or, whatever. To me, it feels quite relaxing. Like, it's almost like a feeling that you're sinking into a hot tub. I don't want to say overwhelming, but I mean, you'll feel it. It's not, that's the thing. People don't understand how powerful these phytochemicals are, because people think of tea, they think of like dehydrated tea packets and stuff. Well, here's the thing. Phytochemicals, they degrade to heat, light, and oxygen. So it just, all the good stuff's gone. You get these dehydrated tea packets. It's like a mild flavor, but tea doesn't do that much to you. If you get a fresh vegetable and extract these chemicals from it, you'll feel it. You'll feel it. It's a strong, relaxing feeling. So play around with it, but see how it goes. Okay, so here's another thing, a huge piece of this. Okay. And this is from a totally different world. I'm kind of studying this and piecing these things together. But one thing that I've noticed over the years with people reacting to my first thing is some people, like me, are like, my life has completely changed. Like, people who are like, I'm cured. Everything, like, I can't believe this is a miracle, right? Some people are like, this is a huge tool. This is like, it definitely helps a lot, and it's probably as useful of a tool as anything else. But maybe they wouldn't go so far as to be like, I'm literally cured and I'm done, right? And then some people are like, I don't know what y'all are smoking. Like, this doesn't do anything. Okay, so I've never had a gut. I mean, it's one of those things. It's the gut. It's bacteria. Everybody's different. Who knows? And there's other factors too. But there's a very interesting thing I found. If this really comes down to this chemical and its functions, there could be an explanation for this, because here's a fun little story. This was discovered in a DuPont lab, and it didn't have to do with cynaropicrin, but it had to do with bitter chemicals. So DuPont was developing, I don't know, some sort of chemical that had this overwhelming bitterness to it, right? And some scientist accidentally dropped a beaker of it and made a mess, and some of this bitter like powder like got in the air. And one of the guys was like, "Oh my God, like I hate that. Oh, like it's so, I can taste it in my mouth how bad it is." And the other guy, the other scientist next to him was like, "What are you talking about? I don't taste anything." And that just chance thing led to the study of figuring out what are you talking about? And they found out that the TAS2R receptors, essentially how people taste bitterness, vary wildly in their sensitivities. And in the studies that they have done, they have found approximately, if you take a huge group of people, 25% of these people are what they call super tasters, and they're overwhelmingly reactive to bitter stuff. 50% of people are normal tasters, and 25% of people are called non-tasters. It's kind of mind-blowing to me, the fact that like a quarter of people don't taste bitterness. I don't know how no one's mentioning that. You'd think it would come up like socially more often, but that's what they found. So let's extrapolate from that discovery. Okay, are the TAS2R receptors in our mouths basically going to be the same as in our gut? Probably pretty good odds, I would guess. I don't, I'm sure it comes down to your DNA and all that, but I don't know if DNA would really, say, oh no, we're going to have different ones here than there. So let's just assume that, TAS2Rs are consistent, right? Well, some people basically aren't going to react to bitterness. Some people are. Some people are really going to react to bitterness. I might be one of those. I might be one of the ones who's really responsive to bitterness. Okay, so it's a working theory, but there you go, right? I've had a ton of people, and they're out there on the YouTube. You can see it, in my comments on the first video, who are like, their lives are changed, and so it's doing this for some people. But it's always puzzled me, like, if there was some possible reason why, and there probably are a few major reasons why, but I thought that was a very curious possible answer. Next thing, this is just a fun comment for people who want to try, or just a nice comment for people who want to try the artichoke tea thing. There's a lot of people who get like super, they're worried about FODMAPs because their doctor told them about FODMAPs. If you want to hear my rant about FODMAPs, you can watch the first video. Point being, if that's something you're worried about, fructans are not very water soluble, so they're, that tea method is not really going to have meaningful FODMAPs in it. So if that's something you're like obsessively trying to avoid, because this artichoke thing has got you scared, just a fun fact, I don't think it's really a FODMAP issue. In fact, it doesn't hardly taste like anything. It pretty much will taste just about like hot water with maybe a slight grassiness to it. It's actually pretty pleasant. So here's the other thing. Like I mentioned, cynaropicrin and all these phytochemicals, they degrade, well, I don't know about all, but many, they degrade to heat, light, and oxygen. So point being, it's very hard to maintain them, okay? So one of the other things that I'm not super crazy about with extracts, I'm pretty confident that those pills degrade over time. For back in the times when I was using them and all that, it just seemed like, they did. And I don't know if it's, the quality of the capsules they're in. I mean, if oxygen's getting in there, I mean, light probably is not super big deal because they're in a bottle, probably not even heat, but, I don't know. But the great thing about the tea method is it's fresh. It's, there it is. It hasn't degraded. So, um, um, okay. So that's a big first add-on piece, all right, for people who want to go experiment with that stuff. I got a lot else to talk about. So time to move on. Good luck for people who want to mess around with that. If you do, let people know in the comments. All right, time to talk about what's happened since then. So first of all, when I made my first video, I had kind of just figured out the grand scheme of how this stuff was working. I'd found the extracts. I did actually a number of experiments trying to increase my MMCs. I'd use like magnesium and all this kind of stuff to empty, and then found artichoke, and everything started kind of coming together. Okay, so I'd been using it for a few months by the point I made the video, and I was like, I don't have. There's no SIBO symptoms. I don't have any SIBO symptoms. Literally, I don't have the bloating. I don't have the delusional drunkenness from all this bacterial stuff going to my head. I'm fine, right? So I made this video, and at that point I was still taking these extracts. I stopped needing the extracts a month or two after them. It reached the point where I just started phasing it out. You skip one dose just to see, I was very afraid to skip, to be honest. But eventually I, skipped one, and I'm still fine. Nothing happened. And eventually I just didn't buy another bottle, and so I didn't take extracts for, years. So and my SIBO has never come back. I've never had any issues with my small intestine ever again. I don't have any upper stuff. So there's one thing I want to say. There was only one time that was very, very scary in the last 2 years, where I started to have that thought, oh my God, is something coming back? And basically it was kind of out of the blue. But after you live with SIBO for, as long as I did and all that horrible stuff, you always live with this kind of, awareness, right? You remember what it felt like, and you never want that to happen again. So you really pay attention to your gut. And at one point I started to feel like, what is happening? This is it. I'm starting to feel like everything's stagnating again, and everything is, heading the wrong direction quickly. And I started freaking out. I was like, what the heck is this? Okay. And I figured it out. It was that my wife had just started introducing me to stevia, which I'd never had before. I never really used artificial sweeteners. I didn't really think about the whole thing. It was just something she started using, and I tried it, and I was like, oh, it's delicious, and it's better than sugar. Okay, whatever. I like it more than sugar. It tastes better anyway. So I started having it like on a daily basis. I'd put it in tea. I just liked it. And after doing that for a couple weeks, I was slowing down big time in my upper area. And I was so concerned when it started happening. I just started like theorizing, teching everything I was doing. And I stumbled across this thing. This doctor was pointing out that there's a lot of concerns with the stevia thing, because they're finding, even though it's all these great claims, it's not sugar, blah, blah, blah. The trouble is they're saying that a lot of these artificials, not just stevia, but a lot of them, if not all of them, interfere with a bacterial process called quorum sensing, which I don't know a lot about, but my impression is it has to do with, bacteria in our guts. We have a very symbiotic relationship, right? And part of how they do their little jobs that help us and help them all together is they all kind of communicate with each other in some sort of like homeostasis way, right? There's these little channels of communication going on between all these little tribes. Well, this artificial sweetener stuff shuts that off. That quorum sensing mechanism by which they communicate is shut off. So all of a sudden, all those little jobs that we're relying on to have our intestines function are shut off. And so I was like, oh my God, I stopped taking it immediately, and within 2 days I was back to normal, and none of that ever happened again. So That stuff is super scary. I'm not, going to say it would just give a normal person SIBO or something like that. I don't know if it's that bad. But if you're a SIBO person and you have a if you're a history of, small intestinal problems, I would not screw around with artificial sweeteners. And after I found all that, I was digging, thinking surely someone in this world has said something about it. And sure enough, it turned out Dr. Pimentel had actually gone out and said SIBO people should not have stevia because it interferes with MMCs. So there you go. It's already been discussed by the experts. I just didn't know about it. So watch out for that stuff. I've never had any small intestine scares for years ever since then, right? And I don't take extracts. I've experimented with this tea stuff because it was frustrating me how people were relying so much on extracts, and I felt like there should be some other solution. But I don't take anything like that routinely. I don't have small intestine concerns. Okay. All right. Time to keep going. There's a lot to get through. All right, let's talk about my origin story. My wife actually figured it out. It wasn't me. I thought so much, trying to figure out, but man, it is hard to figure out how you just suddenly started getting sick like 7 years ago. Like what happened? I don't know. And, the main thing they say with all the studies is like 80% of these cases come from food poisoning. And it's like, and they do say it could even be a mild one. You might not have even noticed and stuff like that. So I always just kind of thought, well, I guess maybe that was it. I don't know. But no, there was actually a specific event. Story time. So back then, and it helped that I was in a certain living situation that was kind of transient. That helps me really pin down where it happened because I was living in a place for a certain amount of time when this happened. And that was right also just before all of this started, which I talked about in my first video. It really started beginning with like back pain and all this kind of stuff. Just before that, something significant happened. So I was on a business trip and I was just about to come back because I remember being in the airport going through security, and my wife called me, and she had gone to stay with her parents because we had a baby at the time, and so she went to go stay with them for help while I was gone. And they had gone to a restaurant. It was like a taco place, and I can only imagine, you got a literal baby, sitting at the table in some high chair or something, probably putting his hands and his face on everything in front of him. And when they left that place, very soon afterwards, he vomited directly onto my mother-in-law. And within about an hour, then she started vomiting. And then her husband was the next one, and then my wife and her sister, everybody who was there, just chain reaction, but they're all living in the same living space at that point. And it was always a very confusing thing because they didn't eat the same food. So, but they were all describing it very much as food poisoning. Most of them said it was the sickest they'd ever been in their entire lives, and including I think the mother-in-law said that, and it was unbelievably bad, apparently. Like, I think they were at a certain point borderline afraid for their safety because of how violently bad it was. And she has a nurse relative who was so concerned about how bad it was that she went out of their way somehow, and I don't know the full story, but she brought or helped them get, maybe because they couldn't leave the apartment, a medication called Zofran, which is something to help people stop throwing up. And they'll do it maybe for like cancer patients or some people where it's really severe and like it's a concern. So she brought Zofran over, and yeah, apparently so bad. My wife told me that she remembered, being sick and leaning her body so that when she passed out, thinking that she would, that her head would hit carpet rather than the tile. So, it was like horrendously bad. And at the time, I remember, so she calls me to say, we're dying over here. It's like the end of the world. Everyone's just, it's horrible. And I remember getting really irritated. Just like, like, man, it's already hard enough, at that time. It was tough times and a new baby and all this. And it's like, I step away for 2 minutes and now everybody's, falling apart. So I got irritated in the airport and I was like, whatever. So I go home. I fly back to our place we were staying. We were leasing a home in another city. So they, shortly after, maybe a day or two later, come home to our home where we're living. And very quickly, I start to feel ill. And they've stopped, being sick for, I don't know, a day or two. But very quickly, I start to feel ill. And I'm like, I'm trying to work. It's early times, young family, and I'm like, I don't have time for this, whatever this kid crap is. I don't know what he picked up off a table or whatever, but, screw this. And I'm just like, oh, great, here we go. And my wife says, well, they got this Zofran. And she didn't want to use it because she didn't trust it, but some of them had used it. And she's like, there's that. And I remember thinking, and I really hate throwing up. And so I thought, well, doctors gave it to him for this. So I took it. So I took it and basically didn't get sick. So you think. So here's the deal. Virtually certainly what was that? So food poisoning, there's a kind of food poisoning that is considered a food poisoning that you can get from not food. It is from the norovirus. So it's the thing why they always put on restaurants, like, make sure you're fired if you don't wash your hands and all this kind of stuff, right? So norovirus is like a horrific disease. Like, it can completely wreck your body up. And there's really not a great solution for it. And that's why there's all these, like, hardcore food safety standards about it, right? And, of course, you got some baby who goes and wipes his mouth all over a table or something. That's basically how you end up with freaking norovirus. And it's super transmissible from person to person, right? So even though they went to this restaurant and they all got sick, we were always kind of tying it to it's a food thing, but then it's like, but they were like, well, we didn't eat the same food. And it's like, well, then what does it even mean? But it seemed like food poisoning from the reaction they had. Well, it's norovirus. So here's the deal. Norovirus, they estimate 13% of norovirus cases get what they call post-infectious IBS. Now, we're going to talk a lot about IBS and IBS versus SIBO and all this, but let me just go ahead and just briefly introduce it, and we're going to run with it for a bit, right? And we're going to recap a lot. And it's going to be a wild story, right? But let's just run with this for now. So first of all, briefly, let's say at a high level, what's the view on IBS, or my view on IBS? Definitely make your own opinions on this, because IBS is super poorly, if at all, defined whatsoever, right? But so I'm going to kind of clarify my opinions or my thoughts on it as we go through this. So, what IBS is more, essentially defined as, if you're going to go to a doctor now and they're going to say you have IBS. Well, how do they actually do that? They do that by following something called the Rome 4 criteria, and I'll get back to that later in this talk, and what exactly that is. And fundamentally, what it comes down to is it's very poorly defined process, right? Where unlike so many other things, including SIBO, where at least they have some form of test, some form of diagnostic, right, that they can do, whether it could be a breath test, could be that they, take a sample out of your small intestine and have it tested. There's a lot of different things they can do. There's none of that for IBS. There's no thing that they go measure, right? Now, for people. Okay, so what happens with the Rome 4 process is they basically say, let's make sure he doesn't have Crohn's, colitis, IBD, celiac, any of this like stuff that is like fairly common-ish that we know of that's measurable. And then after we've checked all that stuff, if you Rome 4 says if you say that you have intestinal pain, with this amount of frequency for at least X number of months, well, then we're just going to call it IBS. Okay. So now what's the issue with that? That's a diagnosis by exclusion, right? So, by definition, you're including any possible ailment it could be that we don't even know. We haven't even discovered surely every possible disease, but we're going to call that IBS because it's a catch-all for everything that we don't know what it is. Okay. So it's a flawed process, but let's give them a little bit of a room to work, and let's assume that there's some validity to this, because to be honest, for a while I really wasn't sure that it even existed at all. I thought it might just be kind of an insurance thing, right? But the one thing where it finally kind of started a little bit take a turn for me, where I started to think IBS, okay, well, there's some validity to it, is when you start reading about something called visceral hypersensitivity. Now, that's the closest thing that they've come to where they can actually measure it, right? So what that is, visceral hypersensitivity, that's kind of what they'll call, that's like how IBS presents, right? So functionally, that means your intestines are hypersensitive. Visceral, I think, just kind of refers to intestines, okay? So they're super sensitive. Okay, so how are they measuring that? Well, in animals, they'll do, I've read studies, they've taken rats and they poison them, right? And then, they'll inflate a balloon inside their intestines to find out how many of them exhibit pain once the balloon inflates to a certain amount. And some amount of them, the balloon will inflate just enough to start touching the intestines or putting some form of pressure there. But it might be like a normal amount of pressure, like the amount of pressure that like food might put there or something like that, right? And a bunch of them won't exhibit any sort of pain. And the ones that developed visceral hypersensitivity, i.e. IBS, they freak out or they exhibit pain symptoms, okay? So that is the one and only measurement that I've ever heard of that could be, you could say, well, that's representative that IBS is a thing, okay? So let's just go ahead with that and say, okay, so fundamentally, you can poison animals, including people, with diseases like norovirus or other food poisonings, right? And cause just a scorched earth effect to their intestines, right? Tons of damage to the nerves and the function and all this stuff. And then you end up with this hypersensitive intestinal wall, which apparently can work any which way. They don't even understand the mechanisms of visceral hypersensitivity. That's part of the problem. They can measure that it exists because this thing hurts and this thing doesn't, and we're doing the same thing with the balloon. But it's really weird. Some people, the intestines seize up and become constipated. Some people, their reaction is to dump everything out. Some people, it doesn't even have a motility response. It becomes an anxiety response. Some people have a mental response. So it's weird. They'll have IBS and not even know they have IBS because they don't present with any physical symptoms. They only present with mental symptoms. Which, in my opinion, is a huge glaring. They know that, and that's a huge glaring hole in the Rome 4 process because they don't quantify that as, do you have anxiety related to eating food or using the bathroom, right? Which would capture those people. But from what I can tell, Rome 4 is clearly about pain, right? So anyway, there's a lot of issues with what IBS is, but this visceral hypersensitivity thing at least puts some kind of physical measurement to it, which at least gives it some validity to me. Okay, so in my case, my perspective on that now is I think that I was given norovirus through people, and apparently a horrific strain of it, because there's many different strains and they have different intensities and stuff, but apparently I got some god-awful version of it, and the minute that my body said, holy crap, what is this, we need to expel this thing, I was like, no, we'll take this Zofran. which basically shut off the processes by which my body would have attempted to save itself. And then I think it just completely destroyed my insides. So at that point, it was not long past that when all the story of my first video started, because we were not living in that home for a very long time. So it was probably only a matter of months after then that it would line up with everything. It started with, in my opinion, what happened is, I would say my hypersensitivity function would be in the IBS-C category, right? So I started sort of everything reacting to food by just stressing shut everything, right? So I just started getting lower intestine problems, right? So everything is backing up, but I'm not used to that. I don't know what that is because I've never had motility functions as like a 24-year-old. And so I got all these confusions about why do I have low back pain and why is it so bad overnight, and I'm just on and on and on, right? So in my opinion, I think that was the early stages, and I do not think I had SIBO right in the beginning. I think it was fundamentally that. It was my lower intestine function. It was just failing, right? And I floundered for, I think, about 2 full years from then. Because there was a very long period with all this bedding stuff. I mean, a very long period thinking it was a bed issue, it was a back issue. I even went to I didn't even tell you all the stuff, right? I went to a foot doctor thinking it was a gait issue. There was a full year of that, and then there was a full year of, after going to this pelvic person, then going to the DPT who was doing all this physical therapy stuff to help me with the pain. That was a long time I was going to her, and she's the first person who ever said, okay, something's up with your intestines, because she started doing visceral massage and stuff. She's like, something's going on here. So I think basically what happened was about 2 whole years of like total intestinal, shutdown. And I didn't have upper issues yet. It was really lower. But I think that was a long enough period that by the time I finally made it to just my first general doctor for asking about intestinal stuff, they called it IBS right off the bat. They go, okay, well, that's, everything's IBS. And the real trouble is it had become already SIBO by that point, because I remember that some of the other more horrific stuff had started showing up by then, like some of this brain stuff and some of this other stuff had started really becoming a problem. And that's, part of what made me scared enough to be like, okay, I need to go to a doctor. Okay, so, and of course what ends up happening then is they go, everything's IBS, because that's the way it's all set up to work, and we'll talk more about that. But they go, okay, wait, it's IBS. And the trouble is, if you've been, slowed down and backed up enough, right, and then maybe it's backed up all the way so that now you've got bacteria leaching into your small intestine or failing to get out or whatever it is, but there's some kind of bridge happening across your ileum somehow. You get to the point where now you've got small bowel function issues, and maybe some of that also, was coming from the damage from the disease as well. Maybe it just took longer to take place to really start to become a problem. It's probably all of the above. But by the time I went to an actual doctor, I had some SIBO happening. And then when you say, well, let's treat it like IBS, well, the IBS approach is restrictive diets, i.e. FODMAP, and probiotics, and both of those things are a big issue for SIBO. I mean, for a SIBO person, you're further restricting their diet, making them more stressed, more sick, more malnourished, which causes more problems because your lack of vitamins causes more function loss. And then you throw probiotics on it. Well, now you've just thrown a bunch of crazy mix of probiotics inside of a small intestine, which already has too much bacteria problems going on, and on and on. And so you really can't treat SIBO by treating the way IBS is treated. And so, it just becomes this, even if you have both, right? Which probably a ton of people do, right? One way or another. So that's really the trouble, is like the doctors are trying to get to this large intestine problem, but you can't get to the large intestine problem without addressing this just enormous small intestine problem that's in the way, right? And in fact, trying to address the large intestine function issue is going to make worse the small intestine problem that's in the way. Okay, so that's what I think is, that's one way to look at what happened now, that I think is more or less probably the right way to look at it, although we'll talk more about the IBS thing as this goes on, because it gets even more interesting. Okay, so let's see. All right, so then, kind of, if we continue recapping my old story, but with this thought process, okay, so then I find stuff to clear out the SIBO problem, right? And in fact, it clears. So the key with the artichoke thing and the cynaropicrin thing really is that it's one of the only things that might actually be capable of treating both. Because this whole issue, like I just said, is how are you going to treat this downstream problem when you have this upstream problem and they're not compatible? Well, the cynaropicrin thing, it kind of helps all of the above, right? And so I finally found something that is like, it's analgesic, it's antispasmodic, it's doing all this stuff. And so it's like, okay, it's promoting upper MMC function and also calming down my large intestine, which is constantly spasming and painful and all this kind of stuff, right? And and I have to bring up, there's a point in the first video I mentioned where at a certain point in my process, I developed a pain in my large intestine, which scared me because it hurt so much. And I ended up, that's why I had a colonoscopy, thought it was diverticulitis because of where it was located, and I had no diverticulitis. And afterwards, the GA said a comment, which is really a problematic comment, because she said it's probably some superficial tear because of all the inflammation and etc. that you've experienced. Okay, so we'll come back to that, but my point is keep that in mind, because that aching pain in my large intestine, ever since she said I had a mechanical injury, I just disregarded it. I was like, well, that's just, I just live with that now. That's just what happened, right? So I ended up finding all this stuff to clear out my small intestine, stimulate my small intestine, and it was also passing through my large intestine. Everything was kind of functioning again because of this stimulant, right? And so, I'm, from a SIBO perspective, I've never had small intestine problems ever against them, right? I kind of got everything kickstarted, everything going. Okay, so here's the situation. For about a year after my last video, I didn't even take any extracts, didn't take any whatever, didn't have any small intestine problems, anything like that. But about a year after that, I started thinking, because I'm going to work, I'm working with these people, and I'm living like a normal person. I don't live on restricted diets. If we're gonna go eat hamburgers for lunch, I eat hamburgers. I don't, anything that would be like unimaginable as a SIBO person, right? I'm just living like whatever. I do try to eat healthy and all that, but I basically just behave like a normal person. But after about a year, I started to get a little suspicious, because like I say, you always pay attention to your gut after you lived with something as horrific as the SIBO thing was. And I started to become suspicious that I'd noticed that I would get a sort of kind of a tired, just like a tired, just worn out feeling after eating sometimes. And I had coworkers that would do we'd go out, we'd eat the same whatever, and especially if it was obviously not great food, and they could just go back to work like nothing happened, and I would just kind of be like, man, like, I just want to go home. I'm done with today. Now, totally not like SIBO stuff, so don't conflate it. I'm not talking about the horrific brain fog, drunkenness, like unbelievable life-ending stuff. I'm just talking about more normal, like, man, I had a big crappy lunch and I want to go home. And that's still in the realm of this is normal people stuff. But I thought, why are these other guys more impervious to it than me? And so I really started to think, I think, maybe this has to do with some of the more like microbiome, large intestine stuff that people are always obsessing about. Like if you have a great microbiome, you're more resilient and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, I never even really looked into that world because basically in my first video, talk about the probiotic thing really caused me issues because I had SIBO. And then it dawned on me, I don't have any SIBO. I could try probiotics if I want to at this point, right? And, maybe I probably have a terrible large intestine biome because of everything that happened in the past. Why would I have a good biome anyway? So I thought, let's mess around. Let's try a probiotic. And for many months, I went through this whole rabbit hole about probiotics. And the reason why is I took my first one, which was called Visbiome. I took my first one, and all that I was hoping to get from it was like maybe I'll feel more like resilient, right? I won't feel that tiredness after I eat. Kind of like a tired and just like, I don't know, it's hard to put words to it, right? It's not quite brain fog, it's different. But it feels like energy's being diverted or something like that. But anyway, so I took Visbiome, and the thing that absolutely blew me away is I took it, and in one night, I woke up the next morning, and this is kind of what I want to tie back. I pointed out to that pain that I had. It's like a discomfort in my large intestine that my GI said, oh, that's some superficial harm or whatever. So it had just been implicit for me for a long time that ache would come and go. And I always just thought, that's just because of what happened to me in the past, whatever. But mostly it would be there. Like usually I would wake up in the morning and I would feel an ache in my large intestine until I would go to the bathroom. And it was annoying. It was annoying because I'd wake up and kind of be in pain, and it just was like, So I took Visbiome, and immediately that was gone, which was not something I was even expecting because I thought I had an actual mechanical harm. And so then I was blown away, and I said, wait a second, wait. You're telling me bacteria, putting those in my large intestine made that ache that I have in the mornings disappear? Like, okay, then something's not right then. That points to something bigger. And so then I was pretty convinced, okay, well then I really need to go down this probiotic deal, right? And I start also questioning this whole IBS thing, right? Because that's all wrapped up in all this. Like, okay, well, how does this play into all this? Okay, so I start trying probiotics, and I don't want to spend forever talking about probiotics, but, long story short, the thing with probiotics, I still would not at all recommend them I know people want to debate it all the time, but in my opinion, it's really hard to find a probiotic that you can tolerate when SIBO is going on, and I never managed to find one that was tolerable. And to be honest, I went to the ends of the earth trying to figure it out. I specifically sought out ones that had only been studied specifically for SIBO people, and like for example, Yakult had been studied, and they're like, oh yeah, this helps SIBO people. Well, guess what? You take Yakult, and you know what happens? It's sustained in a prebiotic formula, so you get all this sugar that goes and shoots your symptoms off like crazy, because you have SIBO, right? So it's that's the thing they don't want to talk about, right? So I got so fed up with trying to make the probiotic thing work on SIBO, and so I'm still remain critical about it, even though people can make some interesting arguments, but maybe it could help people. But anyway, the probiotic story for people without SIBO, I want to talk about people who just have a large intestine discomfort. That's not, your small bowel's fine, you're more like normal, whether you want to call it IBS or just somebody with a non-optimum microbiome or whatever the heck you want, right? A lot of people mess around with probiotics. My TLDR 2 cents on probiotics is that the thing they don't tell you is that they many strains massively contribute to neurotransmitter production. So you are going to really run into some interesting experiences when you're going to have like your serotonin levels and your GABA levels just skyrocket all of a sudden, depending on which ones you take. And in many cases, they consider all this a positive because they're like, well, these are all good things and on and on. And so I think, they try to kind of sweep it under the rug because for some people it actually is a healthy thing. But for me, I struggle with it because I'm not used to having my serotonin and GABA levels and stuff toyed with. And for a while, I was really kind of like in a weird daze and just couldn't figure out. I was like, okay, it makes my ache in my large intestine disappear. Like, I don't have it as long as I'm taking it. But if I keep taking these on a daily basis, like, I'm living like under a cloud. It's like, I mean, honestly, I haven't been on antidepressants, but people in my family who have, they're like, yeah, you're talking about like taking SSRIs. Basically, that's what you're living in. You're like living with a blanket over your head and you can hardly think. And so it's all this weird, like, you toy with the dosing to try to make it not too much of that while it still helps your gut. And then you start toying with other strains because some strains do more neurotransmitter stuff than others. Eventually, I ended up finding one. I sought out like the one that had a reputation for like the absolute least neurotransmitter activity, so I could stand it and not feel like I was being like messed with in my head. And it was good. It's fine. It's fine. So I ended up with finding this kind of neutral, probiotic thing that I was able to play with. And so that solved the pain thing, which really concerned me because when I saw that was solvable, I was like, well, that's not good. I can't just have pain for a reason that I shouldn't have pain there, right? So I figured I needed to maintain my health. I needed to be on something, right? So the other thing that I found similarly around this time is the tiredness. So the tiredness reaction to eating, the probiotics wouldn't solve that. They were really good. That's what I took them for in the first place, but I didn't find that they were helpful at all for that. It was that it took away that ache that I had overnight and in the morning in my large intestine. So I had to keep looking for something to help that feeling of, if I eat a meal and I feel just like, ugh. And I found that peppermint oil, because at this point I'm really suspecting this whole IBS thing and trying to figure it out. Peppermint oil is a super big thing. They talk about a lot. It's been studied quite a bit. Very good thoughts on it. So I found that, yeah, and when I take that with food, I take it like 30 minutes before I'd eat the food, and it would have much less of an impact on me. And so, okay, so at this point I'm living with peppermint oil and a specific strain of probiotic that I can tolerate that doesn't mess with me. And it's kind of like, well, I guess this is just life. It's nowhere near, and that's the thing I need to spend quite a bit of time touching on, and I'll come back to it. But IBS, all this stuff that I'm talking about at this point, this is not anything I would categorize even remotely in the same level of problem as SIBO. This stuff, like the tiredness after eating and the ache that I feel in the mornings until I go to the bathroom, these are really annoying. These are annoying things. SIBO is life-ending. I mean, I don't want to recap that whole last video, but it is utterly life-destroying. And not to be completely dramatic, but it really does prove a point. I've spoken to literally thousands of people with SIBO for over the last couple of years because I communicate to a lot of people. I don't keep up with every message. In fact, I don't even keep up with the minority of them at this point. I don't even get to see them because get so many messages. I can't keep up with it anymore. However, for a while I was keeping up with them, and I'd spoken to many thousands of people over the last couple of years. And one of the experiences I've had that really stood out to me is somebody who was a SIBO person. They were in another country, but their life was very, very similar to where mine was, maybe even a tad bit worse. And they had been approved by their government for assisted suicide because even the government would say that your life is not worth living with how bad that disease is. Okay, so SIBO is not even in the same universe at all with what I'm talking about with this IBS stuff, or if we want to call IBS whatever, right? This is it's nitpicky by comparison, right? It's just that I'm somebody who cares about my gut health at this point, and if there's something that I see that's like not optimal, then I'm going to try to fix it. But I definitely don't want to make it sound like, oh, this is all equal and this is one and the same, because it is not. And that is why there is, you know, it's a huge part of why doctors are massively screwing up this situation with IBS over here. IBS, this like really not defined thing, this catch-all that might apply. It might be, these things that I'm dealing, like I'm talking about in this situation. And then you got SIBO over here, where it's like, no, don't call those the same, because not only because you can't treat them similarly, but because this over here is a whole different universe, right? And so as somebody who, at least by their definitions of what IBS is and what SIBO is, I can firmly say I have experienced both of these things probably on top of each other and completely independently at this point, right? Stop mixing them up. I'm saying this to doctors. Stop acting like they're the same thing, because they are nowhere near. Nowhere near. You need to be very, very serious about not taking someone who's got the SIBO stuff and being like, oh, that's IBS, because it's a different universe, right? Some large intestine non-optimal, like, irritation is nowhere near all the horrific things that happen when your small intestine is totally screwed up, right? So, to continue talking about this, there's a number of interesting things here to talk about. First of all, let's go full circle on the cynaropicrin thing. They have studied cynaropicrin's use on IBS patients, and I will link some beneath this. So one of the studies, it was like they talk a lot about how like dyspepsia and IBS are the same, or kind of all mixed together or whatever. So one of them found that when they gave cynaropicrin to dyspeptic people, they have like an index. I'm sure it's something sort of questionnaire where they ask people 1 through 10 or whatever it is, what their symptoms are. So they have some kind of index where they measure the severity of your dyspeptic, symptoms, right? So it found about a 40% drop in 2 months for those people. So significant improvement by taking cynaropicrin. Okay, another study I'll list showed also great improvement in the IBS patients, but more specifically, the one thing that really stands out is that 96% of the patients said cynaropicrin was as good as any other medicine they'd ever been given for IBS, or better. It was as good as or better than anything they'd ever been given for IBS. Okay. A third study, which is also very interesting, is they took guinea pigs, and they took what they did is they antagonized their ileum, right, which is really that bottom end of the small intestine getting to the large intestine, where a lot of SIBO questions really end up, right? For a lot of people, they're not as lucky as I shouldn't say lucky, but from a test perspective, it was fortunate that my results were very quick and early, so there really wasn't a question. But a lot of people are close to that cutoff time, like that 90-minute time, and the reason why is because they're trying to get a measurement from like that last bit of the small intestine, where usually there's some kind of interaction that shouldn't be occurring with bacteria, kind of whether they've started migrating up from the large intestine or whatever that is. That's an area where a lot of people have questions, is that ileum part, like whether or not SIBO is developing at the end of the small intestine there. So they took guinea pigs and they applied a chemical to their ileum specifically. Let me see. And when they and so basically it forced their ileum to be in spasm. They gave them acetylcholine, right? So they had contracting ileum, right? And then what they did is they gave them cynaropicrin and saw that it was potent at relaxing the spasm in the ileum, right? So all interesting stuff. kind of continuing this talk about how cynaropicrin can be helpful for not just SIBO, issues where you've got, spasm in the small intestine, even specifically in the ileum area. Although this was guinea pigs, but let's continue. This is we gotta work with what we have, right? Because there's not a lot of stuff that's out there, right? So, hypothesizing here, we have, demonstration that the cynaropicrin will relax a spasming small intestine, specifically towards the end of it, the ileum, to help it function. And then you have studies showing the large intestine, you've got all this improvement in all these IBS issues, etc. Okay. All right. So I want to talk now about more on this IBS thing. Okay. So one of the big things that comes up all the time, as it came up in my story, but I see it continuously in the community. People being like, why are we being told all the time, this is IBS and et cetera, et cetera. Right. There is a study I'm going to link below. And actually, no, it's not a study. It's actually now it's on PubMed, but it's basically what they would. It's an example of what they would teach teach and train doctors with, right? So it's literally a paper on PubMed called Rome Criteria and a Diagnostic Approach to Irritable Bowel Syndrome, right? So this is a paper instructing people with a case study. Here is how you properly diagnose IBS. And if you want to understand why SIBO people are getting wrapped up in the IBS world, it will be an incredibly powerful read for you, because you will find out that they're told to. They're specifically told to do this. You've got a situation fundamentally where, especially when you read the case study, I mean, it's a textbook study of somebody who had food poisoning, along with other people, but the other people went back to normal, but she never did, right? And it's been going on for years and years, and in which, this isn't just an IBS issue, but it's a known SIBO issue, right? Again, like they think 80% of SIBO cases originate from that, right? And it goes on and on. But the thing is, I want to point out there's one particular piece in here where, first of all, you see how the diagnosis occurs, right? They rule out the stuff that they can measure. They rule out the IBDs. They rule out the stuff that, it's clear, right? That they want to make sure she doesn't have celiac all of a sudden, or whatever the heck it is. But then eventually you get to, okay, here's the Roma criteria. Here's how we know. Here's how we officially decide, well, this must be IBS because it wasn't this other thing. And it really just comes down to, have you had, they have Rome 4 in here somewhere. I'll find it. Okay, there's a few different tables. I don't want to make you wait. You can read it yourself. But fundamentally, it just comes down to something very simple. Like, have you had, abdominal pain at least once a week, for some number of months, like 3 or whatever it is, related somehow to going to the bathroom, right? And that's just the definition of it, right? We're gonna say, well, that's IBS, right? As long as you don't have these other things and you say that you have pain related to going to the bathroom, you have IBS. Okay, so obviously we've already said that's a disease it's a diagnosis by exclusion. It's by definition flawed. There's probably a lot of good reasons why it was the best effort to do this, because it gets into the insurance processes, and there's a lot of reasons why you want to at least have some kind of definition, because then you could at least give people some help rather than no help, especially when you can't come up with a test to actually measure and confirm that they have a disease. So there's probably a lot of good intentions that went along with creating this in the beginning. But the trouble is it's really become bastardized. And one thing that's so important is in that paper, you can really see how bastardized it's become. Because there's a quote in there where, after they went through all that, right, they just said, we made sure it wasn't anything else. Then we asked them, some absurdly basic question like, do you have discomfort, frequently? And it's like, yeah, I mean, imagine asking any of these SIBO people, or, Like if you had, bowel issues, it's like, of course. And then they say, oh, well, that's proof. Then it's IBS, right? And the more important thing is they say, here's a quote: "At this point, the patient should be confidently told that no further testing is required. Extensive testing is unlikely to uncover an alternative diagnosis and will not reassure the patient." And so there you go. They're specifically instructed to not let you learn about SIBO, that the possibility that something else could be happening. It's specifically, let's make sure that they, this is what we got. You're going to tell this person now to go do FODMAP or, whatever BS, or do probiotics, whatever, which would be fine if you just had IBS, right? But if it's become a small intestine problem for you, they are told to fight you. They're told. They said, don't even let them figure out that there is any of that stuff, right? Because it's going to be a big problem. Well, what's a big problem is them having a disease in another organ that you're not even agreeing to look at. That's a lot bigger problem, right? You're worried about and a lot of this has to do with eroding the trust of that patients have for physicians. Well, what erodes their trust? When you fail to do your job, right? When you fail to actually figure out what's going wrong. Because you can tell these people it's IBS and just to go do this and that. Well, yeah, they tried that on me, and I did what they said too, and it didn't. It only made things worse. When I had SIBO. But again, it's it all comes back to how the heck are they supposed to do anything about it when you really have to kind of skip over the middle organ, and I think that's why this artichoke thing is a huge deal for people, because it seems to have actually managed to find a way to do that for some people, right? One thing that I do think is very ironic in that paper, though, at the end is they basically say, oh, after all that, they say, okay, and now what you need to do is basically do everything that you do for SIBO, including give them Xifaxan. So it's like, wait a second, so you're saying there's a bacterial problem? Like, what exactly is the problem, right? They never really define what it is. They just kind of throw it in at the end, like, oh, I'm going to do Xifaxan. Like, okay. So yeah, IBS, it's an issue now, and I'm willing to go full circle about a lot of it, right? Because, as I've already said, I do think that large intestine function issue was a big, there was a process there, right? I don't think it was SIBO from day one. I think it evolved from some kind of cramping slowdown in the large intestine, right? So there's something there, but it is so poorly defined, and they are really instructed to get in your way if you're needing to find out that there's anything else, right? So just be aware of that. That's why everyone has to fight in this SIBO world, right? Because what they're told is, what would be great is if I went to a doctor right away when I knew it was an intestinal issue when my problems first started, although it would be really hard to figure out because I didn't feel it as an intestinal problem, and was like, oh, this is IBS, blah blah blah, and they did those things, maybe it wouldn't have ever escalated. So maybe that would have been okay. I don't know, but point was, it was too late, right? And if it's too late, you're just stuck because they're just told to concentrate on that last part. It's just, so that is what it is. And the other thing that I want to mention that's a huge issue is a lot of this has to do with billing and insurance and all this kind of stuff. So a huge another reason why SIBO people have had a hell of a fight is not just because their doctors have been literally told and instructed to fight them and tell them don't do any other tests. It's just IBS, and this is just you stuck for life, and this is just it. Basically, like I ended up just kind of limping along with I'm taking a probiotic, and that helps the pain, and I take a mint or peppermint oil, and that makes me not feel like I'm kind of reacting to food, like in terms of just feeling tired. That's just what they want. They'll just condemn you to that, right? Because it's a untreatable, undefined disease, and that's you forever, right? Okay, so the other thing is there's this whole thing called ICD-10 codes. So ICD-10 codes are basically the origin of how people get help for a disease. Okay, so the World Health Organization essentially have to sanction that a disease exists by giving it one of these codes, and then all the individual countries will come up with their own like billing processes to then trickle that down, right, so that people can end up getting help through the insurance process and all that kind of stuff. Well, clearly IBS has been around for quite a while. They've got codes and all that for all that. Okay, so SIBO got its ICD-10 code on October 1st, 2023. Okay, so that was about 1 year ago from now. So it was a year ago, or a year after my first video. So when I made my first video, SIBO was not even recognized as an actual disease by the World Health Organization. Okay, so there you go. And, you know, I do talk about that a bit in the first video too, how early all this is in the process, and, you know, using the gastritis story and how it took so long. You know, that guy who discovered like the H. pylori thing, you know, it took decades and decades and all that. He poisoned himself eventually to prove it, you know, and get the Nobel Prize like 30 years later. You know, it just takes forever. So everything takes forever, and SIBO literally just got its code 1 year ago. So hopefully that will trickle down through the system. Things will become more accepted that, you know, this is a thing. But in the meantime, you know, that's all part of the problem. Okay, so here we go. Let's keep going, right? Okay, so this is the big thing that I really wanted to end up talking about. So everything I've talked about to this point leads us to, let's say, like 2 months ago or so, right? So about 1 year ago, so like made the video. For about a year, I had really nothing. I wasn't really paying attention to any. I did stop taking supplements, no small intestine problems. And then large intestine, like whatever that IBS thing, whatever you want to call that, I don't really remember it being present. It might have been, but like I said, I was always kind of thinking of that ache in my large intestine as like an injury, so I didn't really pay a lot of attention whenever it did show up. Okay, so then the second year, then I started getting obsessed with, well, let's clear up that large intestine thing, and experiment with probiotics, and then I end up with the oil and whatever. Okay, so finally, after all that stuff, I remembered something that so many people had told me from my first video. I'd gotten so many comments from people, and I don't want to say I ignored it. I actually believed them because they were saying something very valuable. They were saying there's another tool that you have missed that's very easy, that's on the shelf everywhere, and you should experiment with it if you're having these kinds of problems that you're talking about, related to brain function, like energy loss, motility function, all these kinds of things. And the point was, it's vitamin B1, or thiamine, right? Or thiamine, or how the heck you say it. They're like, vitamin B1 basically controls all the things that you're talking about. And apparently it's one of the major candidates for, okay, if you've had screwed up intestines because of something like poisoning or whatever, it's really the vitamin B's and D's that are great candidates for, like, you're going to have malabsorption problems. Like, you're going to end up not having enough. And then it's snowballs. So a bunch of people said, hey, look, B1 is what saved me, and you should really look at it. And I remember thinking, well, if I had SIBO, I would, right? I would go try it, but what am I going to test now? I don't have any small intestine problems. So I just didn't think about it. Like, well, I thought when I do an updated video, I'll throw it out there for everyone to say, hey, go check this out, because it might be another good, easy, low-hanging fruit tool, right? So here I am now trying to tweak this large intestine microbiome, IBS, whatever the heck you want to call this thing, right? And I remember that. I remember this vitamin thing. And I'm like, And I read about it, and I'm like, that could even really, the way it describes all of it is like, that could really be this. Even this, not just, obviously, maybe it could, be involved in the SIBO a long time where it really got out of control, but just this stuff where I eat and I feel like my energy is being sapped. Well, you read about what B1 does. It has to do with converting the carbohydrates into energy for your brain through ATP and these energy processes and all this stuff. And if you don't have enough, if you have a deficient amount, yeah, it ends up causing issues for your mind. And then you throw in It's a relaxing thing. So like it all comes back to that antispasmodic and making the intestines relax and all that kind of stuff. It does that, right? It promotes motility. It does all these things that we're talking about. Vitamin B1 does that. So I thought, let's go do it. All right. So I go get some vitamin B1. Easy. CVS, whatever. It was like a 100 milligram pill. I took one of those, and I had an experience that I mean, I don't want to be grotesque, guys, but like honestly, the best word for it would be like orgasmic. I mean, it was unbelievable. Something was clearly wrong with me that a vitamin would make me feel all of that. Um, it it was an overwhelming feeling of relaxation. It actually felt like I had a professional massage. Like my whole shoulders were tingling and melting, and all this, my whole body felt tingly, and my insides felt like it was like my insides were getting a massage. Everything just felt unbelievably good. I mean, I had to go lay down because I didn't even want to stand up. I felt like, I don't know, it felt like unbelievable. It felt unbelievable. I laid down and just felt like it was the most glorious experience. It was so good feeling. And I thought, holy crap, this is something really big. And there's no way this should be normal. Like someone shouldn't just take just a basic vitamin and feel overwhelmed like this. And so I obviously dug in with that. I start reading, okay, B1, you do want to, it's okay if you're really deficient in it, you can take some of those bigger doses like that, but you kind of want to balance it out with the other Bs, like a B complex, and then you can even want to balance it with the Ds because you could be deficient on Ds too. You got a little, there's a little science and art to figure out there how your body wants to balance and what you're deficient in and all that. And honestly, doctors would be great for that. They can do some tests for all this. Now, here's the thing. Here's the obvious thing. If I have some kind of deficiency, if you heard all my story, I've been poked and prodded and tested a bazillion times. And I went back, and I logged into my patient portals, and I checked every single test I've ever taken. Those bastards never checked my vitamins a single time. Never. Never checked. I've been checked metabolism profiles and, of course, celiac, Crohn's, colitis, they're just every freaking, I don't even know, zillions and zillions and zillions. Never checked. I got checked for diabetes, checked every single freaking thing. Never checked my vitamins. Never. Because I remember thinking, of course, like, that would have been in one of those tests. Now, I don't know, it might be a little more complicated because I read there can be challenges in measuring these vitamin levels because your blood isn't always a great indicator of what's actually in your tissues, and so maybe you ate something and it shows up, but it kind of raises your levels more than they actually are. I'm not sure. I don't know fully how challenging it is to measure your vitamin B's and D's, so maybe that plays into it. Maybe I don't know yet. But I kept taking I basically ended up just taking a B complex and something that has D, calcium and magnesium. It's like a D CalMag, whatever. And they're not huge levels. It's just normal people supplement stuff you get from CVS. And I'm not trying to take giant amounts. And all of my problems disappeared. All of it. Didn't need the probiotic. Didn't need the peppermint oil. Didn't react to food at all. Didn't feel tired after food. Didn't feel the ache in my large intestine. No problems at all. None. And that's been, I would guess like a month and a half, 2 months, something like this by now. So, yeah, I went from being kind of convinced that, okay, there's this IBS thing on top of this SIBO thing, and I figured this out, but IBS is uncurable, so I'm stuck with this forever, and so I'm just going to have to limp along with this probiotic I finally figured out, and the peppermint oil kind of helps, food not be so annoying, and to Oh, I just take vitamins, and I have no problems. So, you tell me, does that mean IBS? Does IBS even, is that even real? Or is it just like a great cover story? Because those things were doing a pretty good job of masking the fact that I clearly had poor vitamin levels. And IBS was a pretty convincing story, wasn't it? Or is IBS real, and it interplays with my vitamins? Like somehow I need extra vitamins, or I'm not absorbing them well. I don't even know, and they don't even know. They haven't really defined it. But what I would say is, if you've gone down this IBS rabbit hole and you find yourself living like that, thinking, I'm trying to tweak my, this issue, you might just have your vitamins not right. And, if it all stems back from some, nuclear bomb that got dropped on your intestines, like what happened to me, which led to all that stuff, I mean, extremely likely that you have malabsorption problems. You probably have really poor functioning insides, and you probably are not absorbing vitamins very well. And all this stuff could literally track back to, you just need a basic ass vitamin you just got from CVS. You could just be like significantly deficient. So, thanks for coming along on the ride on that. There's a reason it was a long story, because I kind of wanted you to have the same experience I had, trying to reason it all out. But that's the situation. So, take vitamins seriously. Look into it. I still don't know. Maybe they can do some great tests for that. I've been interested in getting my levels tested, but y'all know how it is. It takes forever to get an appointment, so I've been on some calendar forever. But in the meantime, I'm supplementing, and I've literally, all my problems have melted away. So to be honest, I don't even really care what they say. I know what has worked for me. But yeah, if you never look seriously at it, definitely do. And the other thing is, if you're a doctor and you're telling people, IBS left and right, for God's sake, check their vitamins. I mean, isn't that like the ABCs of what you should be doing? Anyway, well, why are y'all checking for like every massive IBD thing under the sun, but you didn't check for vitamin B? Or it's just, I don't know. They know the story. They know, okay, you got massive food poisoning, you're having malabsorption problems, you're having intestinal function problems. Like in the paper that I linked about, here's how to use Rome criteria, here's blah blah blah. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the word vitamin is even in there. Is it even part of the process? No, I just control F. It's not vitamin is literally not in there. Why not? Why in the hell not? Maybe because it goes counter to the argument there's this IBS disease that everything needs to be called. I don't know, but take vitamins very, very seriously, because essentially that B1 situation and some of the other Bs and the Ds, they also can play a role in some of this stuff too, but B1 is a big part of it. It probably the bigger part of it for these kind of symptoms that I've had. It's, I don't know, it just blows my mind. Sorry, I lost my train of thought, but I was gonna say, it's another thing like the artichoke cynaropicrin, where it could explain why both, or it could resolve simultaneously a small and large intestine function problem, because if you're severely deficient in it, it will affect all of the above, right? Just as much it will fix all of the above. So that was the whole thing I'm saying. Where if you've got this kind of battle where everything's wrong in this organ and this organ, how are you going to manage to fix both? Well, cynaropicrin is one possibility, and apparently the other one is just make sure your vitamins aren't deficient, because it might literally solve all the above. So there it is, folks. And so, yeah, SIBO has never reared its ugly head again. The really, really scary stuff, like the life-ending stuff, where you can't function, you can't work, you can't think. Every time you eat, you're like delusionally drunk and you're completely screwed. Yeah, I've never had to deal with that ever since I found the extract situation. Took it for a few months and it was gone, and it's never come back. But yeah, this other piece, for a long time I didn't even realize it was there, and now that's kind of the thing. So I don't know. That's my story. Hopefully it helps some of you folks. It's been, I guess, closing comments. It's been a wild ride. I really deeply care about this community because I've been there. I've been through every last bit of it, and so that's why I share my story. Because if any of this helps anybody, then it's worth it, right? Because I know how hard help is to get, and especially if there's any form of help that's even a possible help, and it's something as simple as a tea or a vitamin, and it could change your life, then for goodness sake, we need to share that, right? Because otherwise, this machine that's out there waiting to digest you, they're not checking, they're not helping. So we got to help each other. So that's my interest here. So whatever helped me, I'm letting y'all know, and I hope it helps some of you. And I appreciate all the messages over the years. Like I say, I can't keep up anymore. But it doesn't mean I don't appreciate y'all. It's just life's pretty crazy. I actually took the day off so I could finally get this out there. I just got a lot going on at this point in my life, and it's just kind of crazy. But it's not that I didn't want to get y'all an update. I actually wanted to get y'all an update at 2 years because I thought it would be fun. But there's a lot of stuff still to kind of iron out, and I wanted to have my stuff together before I shared my story. So best of luck to you all, and maybe I'll do another one. I don't know. I probably should, just so y'all know in the future that vitamins indeed were literally the end for me. Let's plan on that. Maybe I'll come back in, what do you think, a year or something? Just say, yeah, no, that was it, vitamins. But as for now, yeah, that's it. So, thank y'all for listening.